Brandstatter. I broadcast Michigan football. I've been around Michigan since 1968. I am honored and indeed privileged to be asked by the family to officiate at this memorial service. This is a celebration of his life. The title really is a misnomer, memorial service. We can call it that, but it's really a celebration of Don Canham's life, and it is a life that indeed can be celebrated. And the first man to talk about Don Canham is a man that we all know, a man that has led the Michigan football program these last 10 years to great heights, to national championships. He's in the tradition of Don Canham, a man that works hard and gets the job done. Please welcome head coach Lloyd Carr.
Thank you. It is an honor to speak today as we celebrate the life of this remarkable man. I have two distinct memories that I think define him as the leader that he was. The first is the day after Bo hired me in 1980. He sent me down to see Mr. Canham, who always met every person that was newly employed. And as I sat down in his office, he said something I've never forgotten. He said, "Lloyd, the surest way to lose your job here is to violate the rules." That was my first introduction into the Michigan way. He was saying that we're going to win, but we're going to win with integrity. We're going to win within the rules.
Our next speaker, he's a guy that actually coaches a sport that Don Canham loved. Don Canham, before he was athletic director, was a track coach here at Michigan. He was also a great track athlete when he was younger. And our next speaker to eulogize Don Canham is Ron Warhurst, the current track coach at 30 years, a Michigan guy.
But 31 years ago, I walked into Mr. Canham's office. At the time we called him Mr. Canham, we still do. And I sat down, and I just got out of the service, went from Vietnam, and my hair was a little longer than normal at that time. And he sat me down and he said, I talked to Coach Harvey, and he said, "I understand you're applying for this position as the distance coach." And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Are you local?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Are you single?" And I said, "Yes." And he says, "Good, you'll work cheap then." That was the first sign I realized that Mr. Canham had financial integrity. And as I was walking out of his office, he stopped and he said, "Oh, by the way, the pay is going to be $5,800 for the year." And I said, "Thank you." I walked out in the hallway, and there's Jack Harvey standing there. And I said, "Harv," I said, "I thought you told me the starting salary started at $6,000. I said, "This is the first time I've ever started a job and got a pay cut before I started working." He says, "You better get used to it. That's why Canham runs the show." We also had, back in those days, I presently have a phone list on my wall, and it's double spaced, and it's capital letters, and it's one column and half a column on the other side. And I think there were 42 names on it, 42 phone numbers on it. And every morning about 10 o'clock, 10:15, everybody would meet down in a coffee shop. We had a coffee shop that was about the size of Bo's office is now over at Schembeckler. And everybody would come down there because it was a small group of people. And this was about 6 months into my working with Don. And he said to me, he says, "Warhurst," he says, "look at your hair." He says, "Get a haircut." And I was pretty long hair at the time. And I said, "Canham," I said, "you don't pay me enough. I can't afford a haircut." So the next day, he saw me in the hallway and he slipped me $5. He said, "Take care of it, will you?"
Our next speaker, former basketball coach here in Michigan, native Michigander, spent many years in Flint, beat the doors down many playgrounds in the city of Detroit to find talent. Please welcome Mr. Bill Frieder.
In 1971, shortly after Crisler was built, the State High School Association moved the championship high school games back to Crisler Arena. And that March, I had the opportunity as a high school coach to coach in the first state championship that was played here. And that's when I met Don Canham. And In meeting Don, I met a man that commanded respect. It was the first thing that I thought about him when I saw him. Shortly after that, next year or two, I was at a U of M Flint golf outing, and he came up to me. I was invited. He came up to me, and you remember, he grabbed me by the arm. He said, "I just signed Notre Dame in football. We're going to play." It was later in the 70s. It's going to be the first $1 million gate in the history of college football. 100,000 people, $10 a ticket, $1 million. That doesn't sound a lot for Bill Martin these days, but back then that was huge. That was huge, and he was so proud of it. So now I met a guy who commanded respect. Now I met a guy with a lot of vision, who was 20 years ahead of his time. Unbelievable. Well, in 1973, when Dick Honing left the Johnny Orr staff as an assistant, I decided, hey, I did enough in high school, I have degrees from Michigan, I need to be an assistant at Michigan. Well, Orr was coming off of a bad season, so Canham decided he wasn't going to replace Honing. He was just going to go with 2 assistants. So Orr had to call me back and said, "Coach, we're just not going to replace an assistant this year." So I called Don myself to try to get an appointment, didn't get a call back or anything. So shortly thereafter, the next day or two, I drove down. And I sat outside his office for 3.5 hours until he would bring me in and see me. And I just told him all the reasons I should be the Michigan assistant basketball coach. And he said, "Well, we're having budget problems." And we all heard this, budget problems, and the board, and this, that, and everything. And he said, "I just need to save the $12,000, and we just can't replace the coach." I said, "Well, if that's the only reason that you're giving me to save the $12,000, I says, I don't have kids, my wife has a job, I'll take the job for nothing." He says, "You got it."